Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Brittany May Banchran. I am the CIBIT GSP Regional Coordinator for the Anglophone Caribbean, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining today's webinar on tracking progress of mitigation commitments of national determined contributions under the ETF. So this session is organized by the CIBIT GSB Climate Transparency Project and executed by the UN Environment Program Copenhagen Climate Center. And this session is delivered this morning due to the requests of countries in this network on furthering understanding and building capacity in understanding the requirements for tracking progress of NDC commitments under transparency reporting processes. So such as the BTR, which is the new reporting vehicle under the Enhanced Transparency Framework. So as you join this morning, I would just like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and the material will be available on the Climate Transparency platform, and a notification will be sent after the session is done. I would like to ask everyone to kindly keep your microphone on mute as speakers are speaking. However, during the presentations, please feel free to type your questions using the chat function. And rest assured that time will be allocated after each speaker to answer your questions. And if you do need to speak, please first virtually raise your hand. And when you go on mute, when you go on mic, you can identify yourself with your name, country, and organization for the benefit of others. And to give a short overview of the main objectives of today's webinar, this webinar aims to support the country teams, those responsible for reporting on mitigation, and country stakeholders in charge of reporting NDC mitigation commitments under the Paris Agreement, to understand the goals, principles, and actions associated with the reporting process for reporting and tracking NDC mitigation commitments. And so today we'll be looking at some of these specific useful information and experiences to facilitate this reporting under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, and also preparing them to use the common tabular formats, which is the formats that would be used to report on NDC progress under the ETF. And also participants will have an opportunity to interact with each other and interact with our presenters to understand some of the specific examples in mitigation assessments, in tracking and reporting, and how these can be reported under the ETF. And to give an overview of what the agenda looks like for this 2-hour session, it will, following the opening, this opening session and introduction by myself, I will hand it off to our speaker from the RCC, Mr. Jason Williams, to give an overview of the interlinkages between NDC tracking under the ETF and transparency, and linking it to the next NDC cycle, followed by our speaker on the Enhanced Transparency Framework, looking at the NDC provisions and overview of the common reporting tables by Ketsiwe Kumalu from the UNEP CCC. And after which we'll have time for question and answers. And then we'll take a look more into some of the specific practicalities in developing NDC indicators and showing examples of how this has been done for countries. And lastly, we have a special guest speaker where we will be hearing from Guyana on their experience in developing their first BTR that was submitted this year, and taking a look at their NDC and mitigation section. And each of these sessions will be followed by an opportunity where you'll be able to raise questions, get feedback from the experts, and then after which we will be closing. So without further ado, I would like to then introduce our first speaker, Mr. Jason Williams, who is the NDC and LT-LED's regional specialist from the RCC in the Caribbean, who will be delivering our interlinkages between NDC and transparency.
Hi, good day. Hi, Brittany. Am I coming over clearly?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thanks, Jason.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Just attempting to share my screen here. See? Okay, great.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Williams, as Brittany said. I am the regional specialist on nationally determined contributions and long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. I'm assigned to the UN Climate Change Regional Collaboration Center for the Caribbean. It's based at the St. George's University in Grenada. Pleased to be joining you today. So on the screen, I have a brief outline of my presentation. I'll start by sharing some information on the UN Climate Change Regional Collaboration Centers. Next, I will give a brief overview of the NDC 3.0. And then finally, I will present on the linkages between NDC 3.0 process and NDC tracking. So first off, the UN Climate Change has established 6 regional collaboration centers around the world, or RCCs as we term them. These centers support national climate action through capacity building, technical assistance, and strategic networking. The centers have been established through partnerships with organizations that are well established in countries within the regions. So on the screen, you can see the cities where these centers have been established and the names also of the host agencies. The centers include RCC Latin America, RCC West and Central Africa, RCC East and Southern Africa, RCC Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, RCC Asia Pacific, and our very own here in the Caribbean, located at the St. George's, Grenada. So just to zoom in a bit on the RCC Caribbean, we cover 16 countries, so the 14 CARICOM countries, and also Cuba and the Dominican Republic. Our RCC was founded in 2013 through a partnership with the Windward Islands Research Center, or WINDREF, located at the St. George's University in Grenada. So now on to the nationally determined contributions. So the Paris Agreement recognizes that the overall goal to limiting the global average temperature to 2 degrees Celsius while pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, that will be achieved through time. So the key underlying principles for climate action by all parties are progression and highest possible ambition. So the Paris Agreement established a mandatory cycle of NDCs. So the first submission was due in 2015, with countries communicating their climate action plans or targets. The updated or enhanced NDCs were due by 2020, communicating targets with an end date of 2030. Countries are then required to submit subsequent NDCs every 5 years. So the new NDCs, or the NDCs 3.0 as we refer to them, are now due in 2025, and they should have a target year of 2035. So what happens once the countries make these submissions? There are several feedback mechanisms, including one of which is a global stocktake. This is a country-driven process enabling countries to see where they're collectively making progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, and also where they're not. It means looking at everything related to where the world stands on climate action and support, identifying the gaps, and working together to agree on solutions pathways. The outcomes of the outcomes of the first GST was presented at COP28 in December 2024. And then we have the Enhanced Transparency Framework, part of which we'll be discussing this webinar today. So all countries are now required to report to the UN climate change on a biennial basis. These reports are known as the biennial transparency reports, as Brittany mentioned earlier. The first is due by December 2024. So now I'll spend some time presenting on NDC tracking and transparency, providing some of the mandates and overview of the guidance to countries. There are several decisions that provide guidance on NDC tracking. So the original mandate to track the progress made in implementing and achieving NDCs was given under Article 13.7 of the Paris Agreement, which states that each party shall regularly provide this information. Article 13.11 of said agreement states that each party shall undergo a technical expert review of the information submitted and shall participate in a facilitated multilateral consideration of progress with respect to achievement of its NDCs. Furthermore, at the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement, or CMA, a decision on the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the transparency framework for action and support was adopted. This decision mandated parties to submit a biennial transparency report, or BTR, which shall contain the information necessary to track progress in implementing and achieving their NDCs. It's important to note, and especially for a region, that LDCs and SIDS may submit the information at their discretion. So I'll speak more about this in later slides and highlight where countries may exercise flexibilities. Decision 5 of CMA 3 presents the outline of the BTR reports. As you can see on the screen, there are several components that make up the BTR. But for the purpose of this webinar, I'll be focusing on the second green box on the screen, which is the part that reports the progress made in implementing and achieving NDCs. So going back to Decision 18 CMA1, this decision further provides guidance on the information necessary to track the progress made in implementing and achieving the NDCs. There are several elements to report on. So there's a section on national circumstances and institutional arrangements. There's a section to describe the parties' NDCs, a section to track the progress. This should include indicators, a narrative on the relevant details, and the common tabular formats. I believe speakers after me will be speaking specifically about the common tabular formats and the indicators. So additionally, parties shall track the progress of NDCs by also submitting information on mitigations, policies and measures, actions and plans, a summary of the GHG emissions and removals, and additionally projections of the GHG emissions and removals. And reductions. This level of reporting was not required for the BUR. So I'll spend some time providing a bit more details on the elements of information to track the progress of NDCs. First, we have the national circumstances and institutional arrangements. Just to note that there are certain information that parties should report on, and these are the shall requirements. So each party shall describe its relevance to the progress made in implementing and achieving its NDCs. Aspects to include are listed on the screen. So that is government structure, population profile, etc. In preparing this section, parties shall ensure that the following information are submitted. So how is national circumstances affect GHG emissions and removals? The institutional arrangements that have been established, including for internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, and the legal, institutional, administrative, and procedural arrangements in place. Second, we have the description of the parties' NDCs, and this includes updates. So progress will be tracked against the information provided here. The parties are provided with a table template outlining the information to submit. While the information items shall be included in the report, the parties do have the option of using the templates or not. So information on both conditional and unconditional targets should be submitted. Information to be submitted include the target name and descriptions, the target type, the target year or years, the reference point, time frame, scope and coverage, etc. So the full details are provided in the MPGs. Third, we have the information necessary to track progress made in implementing and achieving NDCs. So the parties are required to identify the indicator or indicators used to track the progress. For each indicator, the requirements include submitting the reference pointer points and the most recent information for each reporting year and a comparison. Additionally, a description of each methodology and accounting approach for its NDC target should be included. So all information should be submitted in a structured summary, and countries are presented with the templates for this reporting. Additionally, for those parties that have adaptation actions with mitigation co-benefits, they're required to provide relevant information to support the NDC tracking. Fourth, there's a section on mitigation policies and measures, actions and plans. So countries have a shall requirement to provide the relevant information on these policies, actions and measures that support the implementation and achievement of their NDCs. This reporting should be inclusive of those mitigation co-benefits from adaptation actions and the economic diversification plans. The focus should be on those that impact the key categories in the national greenhouse gas inventory. So that is those that have the most significant impact on emissions or removals. The reporting of actions shall be organized by GHG inventory sectors to the extent possible and presented in a tabular format, including relevant information on mitigation co-benefits. Guidance is provided on the information to include as illustrated on the screen. And additionally, countries may provide information on related costs, the non-GHG mitigation benefits, and how these actions interact with each other. Another shall requirement for parties is that they are to submit information on estimates of expected and achieved reductions. But important to note, flexibility is applied to those developing countries that need it in light of their capacities. And to the extent possible, information on methodologies and assumptions used shall be provided also. Fifth, the next element to track the progress of NDCs is the summary of the GHG emissions and removals. So when countries submit standalone national inventory report, they are also required to submit a summary of the results here. As with the previous section, the information here should also be provided in a tabular format. I would also like to emphasize that the summary of the GHG emissions and removals must correspond with the country's most recent national inventory report. The reporting templates are provided, and we have two examples on the screen. All the information to report here should be available in the standalone national GHG inventory reports that countries prepare. The final element is the projection of GHG emissions and removals. So countries shall report on projections for emissions and removals. Again, flexibility is applied to those developing countries that need it in light of their capacities. So unless the country has identified the reporting projection as its baseline, the information will not be used to assess progress towards NDCs, as it is indicative of future trends. When reporting on projections, countries shall report when measures are included. However, they have the option of reporting projections without measures and projections with additional measures. The projection shall begin from the most recent year in the party's inventory report and extend at least 15 years beyond the next year, ending in 0 or 5. So for example, if a country's most recent inventory is 2014, the projections start at that year, but extend at least up to 2030, which is 15 years after 2015. 2015 being the next year ending in 0 or 5. Flexibility is again applied here for developing countries that need it in light of their capacities, and they are allowed to extend their projections to at least the endpoint of their NDCs. It's important to note that countries should provide information on the methodologies used for the projections. They shall report projections for key indicators to determine progress towards the NDCs, and shall also include projections on a sectoral basis by gas and for the national total, and shall also be presented relative to actual inventory data and be provided with and without land use change, and forestry. So the diagram on the screen serves as an example of how the projections of the GHG emissions and removals are to be reported graphically. The timeline should include the base year, the most recent inventory year, and future years. The data on the actual emissions from the base year to the most recent inventory year should be represented in a solid line, while the projections are represented by broken lines, as illustrated on the screen. As stated before, for those countries that are reporting on projections, they must present the projections with measures, and when possible, include those without measures and those with additional measures. So if all the information is provided, then the country can demonstrate the actual and expected effect of implemented policies and measures, as well as the expected effect of planned policies and measures. So coming on to the end of the presentation now, I'd like to highlight a few additional points that countries should be aware of. In the event that countries are submitting both unconditional and conditional targets in their NDCs, they may add a row to the relevant tables to describe the conditional ones. The information provided must follow the guidelines necessary to facilitate clarity, transparency, and understanding when submitting NDCs, to ensure consistency or explain any changes or updates. As mentioned earlier, if the NDCs consist of mitigation co-benefits, the countries shall provide information on domestic policies and measures implemented to address social and economic consequences of response measures. Countries must bear in mind that not all information areas may be relevant to them, or on the other hand, they might have additional matters to consider, and those must also be reported. As mentioned in the presentation, flexibility provisions are specified in the MPGs for those developing country parties that need it in light of their capacities. And it's important to note that the application of flexibility is self-determined by the countries. Lastly, countries should be sure to include a notation FX in their tables when applying flexibility. In those cases, the information on flexibilities and improvements in reporting need to be elaborated in the BTR. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. And thank you very much. I'll hand back over now to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Jason, for a really good, well-rounded introduction to the topic and the correlation between NDC reporting and transparency and how it links to the next NDC cycle. We do have some time if participants would like to ask questions at this point to Jason on the provisions or on the flexibilities that could be applied or the interlinkages. Or we can also wait and hold questions until after our next presentation because they are both they're both covering the similar topic. So instead, let's put your questions in the chat for both Jason and our next presenter, who will be focusing more on the NDC provisions and the common reporting tables. So thank you, Jason, and we will take questions after the next session. So for our next speaker, I'd like to introduce Ms. Katsiwe Kumalu, Senior Advisor at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. She will be taking us through the Enhanced Transparency Framework, taking a little bit closer look at some of the specific provisions that moderate NDC tracking and some of the common reporting tables that will be required to be reported. Thank you, Katsiwe. To you.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much to Jason for introducing the discussions that we are going to have today. And he has actually made my work very easy by bringing in, I think, into our understanding in terms of what are the requirements when we speak about tracking progress of our mitigation commitment in the NDC. And I would like to take over the conversation from him and specifically concentrate more on the common reporting tables, which I think flows better as we all understand, as mentioned earlier from the MPGs, that parties are required to report progress on their NDC in a narrative format, but also on using tables, which is the common reporting tables. So this is basically in Decision 18, CMA 1, which Jason already mentioned. And this is what we refer to as the modalities, procedures, and guidelines for the ETF. And through that, I think you have seen already in terms of what are the key elements that are provided for in the MPGs when it comes to information necessary to track progress made in implementing and achieving the NDC. And these are the very key, very important elements that you have already seen displayed in the outline. And the most important thing is that if you look at these elements, they actually draw from the very essence of why countries are actually implementing their NDCs. So you have national circumstances and institutional arrangements, which basically you state in terms of what is the national circumstance and how you have organized yourself at national level in terms of tracking progress. And then in B, you describe your NDC. And in C, you bring in the information that is necessary to track progress. This is where you describe your indicators. This is where you give a description of the methods and accounting procedures that you would have used. And also, most importantly, indeed, the mitigation policies, actions, and plans. This is basically your milestones that you are using to achieve your target. And C talks about a summary of GHG emissions and removals, very important because here we are talking about mitigation action, and we know that under the whole I think space in terms of the Paris Agreement, the intention is to actually reduce GHG emissions, which is actually going to reflect in terms of how that plays out in terms of temperature increase. And so it's very important to reflect a little bit in terms of what the country would have done in terms of progress, and also understanding that this is in most cases, this is the key indicator for progress in countries at a national level, but also at a global scale. And then that also makes projections of GHG emissions and removals very important. And in section G, you provide any other relevant information. So I'm not going to go into the details of the information that is already been provided for by Jason, but I just want to link all this in terms of how then is this linked to the common reporting tables. So first, we look at what are the CTFs and why do we have to use the CTF. So basically, the common tabular formats are a set of standardized tables that provide a structured way to report information. And this makes it very easy to link to the key principles of comparability and transparency, but also at the same time allowing countries to actually reflect on the flexibility provisions that they would have used or in terms of outlining their progress. So what we see with these tables is kind of take out the information that we have provided already in a narrative, but put it in a more structured way so that it is comparable across the different countries and people are able to understand in terms of the indicators that you have used and how this is flowing into the accounting approaches that we have used, the methodologies, and how this is linked in a holistic manner to your NDC. And why we want to use tables, I think this has been a big discussion also in the negotiations, but what is important is that with the tables, you are able to actually see in a more visual and transparent way how countries have progressed in the implementation and the achieving of their NDC. And when we have tables, it's very easy to compare and analyze the data across countries and sectors vis-a-vis just having a whole big paragraph. So the CTF helps us really to be able to compare and synthesize, as Jason has already pointed out, that subsequent to the submission of the BTR, what is important is also looking overall in terms of progress in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. So the common tabular formats are part of Decision 5, CMA 3, which is operationalizing the MPGs under the ETF. And very important to note that each of the tables are linked to the specific provisions of the MPGs. And I will draw your attention to the table here. In the first column, I have the description in the MPGs and the related table in column 2, and column 3 is actually referencing the relevant paragraphs where you get more details about this information. And the last column is actually recalling the most important flexibility that parties can use in light of their capacities. As already mentioned, the most importantly, countries are expected to describe their NDC. And here the corresponding table is called the appendix, which is the description of a party's NDC. And this is basically putting the information in paragraph 6 in a tabular format, in paragraph 64 of the MPGs in a tabular format. And Jason has already mentioned what is this information. And I'm going to show you how the table looks like. And subsequently, we have the structured summary, which is table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12, which is basically now also bringing further, I think, distillation in terms of the information that is required. Firstly, the description of the selected indicator in table 1, and table 2, speaking to the definition that is needed to understand the NDC. As we know that the NDCs are very diverse, and it's very important that you use the opportunity here to define what certain elements of your NDC, so there is no misunderstanding of what your NDC mean or what different elements of your NDC represent. And in table 3, this is a very important table where it brings, it gives a good summary of the methodologies and accounting approaches that are consistent with Article 4 and paragraph 13 and 14 of the Paris Agreement, in terms of what methodologies and accounting approaches you have used in coming up with the NDC or the indicators that you would have used. And table 4 provides a nice summary in terms of progress in achieving the NDC, and we will see how this is seen. And I've brought here table 12, which is basically linked to information that is necessary to track progress in the implementation of domestic policies and measures implemented to address social and economic consequences of response measures. So we know that many other countries actually, they take this very seriously, the issue of response measures, and also some of the NDCs are actually focused on these elements. So this table summarizes and track progress of those response measures that countries are implementing. And then section D is summarized in table 5, where you are providing progress on the mitigation policies, measures, actions, and plan that you intend to use to achieve your NDC. And the corresponding requirements are in paragraph 82 to 85. And you take note here, you have flexibility provisions in terms of whether you can put in the figures in terms of estimated GHG emissions that are expected to be achieved by each action or policy. And many countries, if you don't have capacity to do so, you have flexibility here not to include this information we are going to see in the table. And then table 6, very important summary of the GHG inventory. And fortunately, this table really just comes from your GHG inventory report. And table 7 to 11, these are key important tables on projections of your greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a table on projections with measures, with additional measures, and without measures, and also a table showing the projections of your key indicators and your key underlying assumptions, parameters that you would have used for projections. So in summary, this is how the tables look like, as I've already mentioned. So you have tables that are related to the description of the NDC and indicator and methods. And then you have tables that are actually focused on the status of mitigation or the status of your progress in achieving your NDC. and then you have the projection tables, and then you have the table on response measures. So this is an example taken from the PACPA, I think, guidance on accounting, which is basically showing the appendix table, which is describing a party's NDC. So you see the first column has all the requirement information that you are supposed to include as according to the MPGs, and then the second column is filled already with information. So here you see that the country has an economy-wide GHG inventory of 20%, and the target here is 2020, and they have a single-year target, and the reference level, also the period of implementation. So this is a very important table that really summarizes your NDC. And most of the information here that is required, you find it in the ICTU table, which I think Jason already mentioned. So many NDCs already have this information, but many also NDCs don't have this table. So, but this table provides that you really summarize your NDC. And the structured summary, as I've already mentioned, table 1, table 2, and table 3 and table 4, and take note of the paragraphs in the MPGs in terms of what information is required in each table. So you have the indicator table, table 1, you have the definition table, the methodology and accounting, and progress in implementing and achieving your NDC. So this is table 1, how it looks like, and on the far right, I have already an example of how this table can be filled, again taken from the PACPA guidance on accounting. So here, if you can see clearly in the first column, this is a GHG inventory, GHG emission NDC. This is the indicator of the NDC, because the NDC is a total economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions and removals in the relevant reporting years of the country. And here also you see information on the reference layer, which is 100 megaton CO2 equivalent, and the base year is 2025. So basically this is how the tables are actually bringing in the information from your NDC in a more structured way. And this is table 2, where you are defining your indicator and also explaining if your sectors are any different from what is in the inventory or what is in the IPCC. So you have to actually bring that into light in this table and describe this, if there's any difference, and also how you have defined mitigation core benefits from adaptation action. So this information you can include in table 2. And this information is required for table 3. I have not provided the example of table 3 because table 3 can be long depending on where you are with your BTR or your NDC, the different type of information that you have, the different type of methodologies and accounting approaches that you have used. But key here is that you have to provide the methodologies and accounting approaches, the metrics that you have used as per the IPCC guidelines. If you have used 2006 IPCC guidelines and you have used the 5th assessment report for metrics, and what assumptions you have used, key parameters, definition, data sources, and models that you would have used. If you have used LEAP models, or if you have used any other model that you might have used, maybe. If you are probably have a baseline scenario type of NDC. And then also you have to mention consistency, how this information is consistent to your accounting of your NDC and GHG inventory. And if in any case, in a subsequent BTR, you have done any changes or improvements in your methodology, here you have to state what you have improved or corrected. And also if you have subsequently, in your subsequent BTR or NDC, you have actually included other categories that you had not included before, or you are excluding those categories that you had included before. This is where you explain this information, and also any accounting approaches that would have been used on cooperative approaches that involves the use of ITMOS. Very important. And table 4 is basically, this is your table that is displaying the results of your accounting approaches in terms of progress that have been made in your achievement of your NDC. And again, also this table can be very long and also can be very short depending on the national circumstances and the type of NDC that you have. So if you are, for example, this table is showing an example where a party is already engaging in cooperative approaches. So if you are not engaging in cooperative approaches, so probably the rows after row 3 may not be relevant. So here what is important is that you see the indicator on the first column and the unit and the reference point in terms of emissions. And then if your NDC implementation period is from 2021 to 2030, so you see subsequent columns you have to mention. So in 2020, how much you have reduced, what progress you have made in terms of reducing ton CO2, and 2022, 2023 until 2030, which is the end of the implementation period of your NDC. And you can notice that the last two columns, the last column basically is showing you progress made, right? So you also have to reflect as you fill this table every time you are preparing your BTR. You have to reflect on the progress that you have made in achieving your NDC. If your goal, for instance, was to reduce, the target was to reduce maybe 50%, so you have to take note. So how far am I now? Am I in course to achieve my NDC or not? So this table basically brings in the numbers that are very important in understanding your progress in achieving your NDC. And then most importantly, this table 5, which is basically shows the mitigation policies and measures as already mentioned. So here you describe each action in a tabular format. So you first have to put in the name of the action, describe the action, what is the objective of the action, what type of instrument is it? Is it a policy? Is it a regulatory instrument? What is the status? Is it be under implementation, ongoing, planned? And which sectors are affected by this policy or measure? What gases are affected? Is it CO2, methane, or nitrous oxide? And the starting year of implementation is, if it's already started, you state the year. If it's going to be started soon, if you know when, you include this, and who is the implementing entity at national level that is driving or coordinating the implementation of this action. And the last two columns, this is where your flexibility, you can apply your flexibility. If you can estimate how much for each policy or action or measure is expected to be the reduction of GHG emissions, and you include the values there. And if you exercise flexibility, then you may not have the values there. Table 6, this is a summary of GHG emissions and removals in accordance with a common reporting table 10 of emission trends. So as I mentioned, this is coming directly from your GHG inventory, and in the common reporting tables, there's table 10, which shows emission trends, and this is the table that you actually include here. And these are the tables for the projections, as we have already seen the graph from Jason's presentation. Here you have table 7 with measures, table 8 without measures, and table 9 without measures. So basically what this means, I think if you say with measures, you are including all the measures that you are implementing in your country or that you have already adopted. This may be projects, policies, plans, whatever that you have already approved at national level, already at implementation stage, and with additional measures, you include those that are a plan and have been adopted, or these are decisions that are actually going to be done. Sometimes you can include project proposals that are in the pipeline, even though they are not approved. So you include this in your additional measures. And here you exclude all policies and measures that are affecting your GHG emissions, as explained. And then you provide this in a table. This is the table with measure scenario. So you include how your GHG emissions will look like in 2020, 2025, and 2030, 2035. And your table 8 will include those with additional measures, table 9 without measures. And table 10 is the projections of your key indicators. You know, when you are very important also to mention here that when you are doing projections, you also want to understand how your indicators will look like in the different years. And this is very important for you to provide in the BTR, because this is also a table that shows progress in terms of how far you are in achieving progress. So here I've provided an example of a field table in terms of the projections of key indicators. So if the indicator is the GHG inventory emissions and removals, and you also have an indicator in terms of solar power installations per gigawatt hour, or in your NDC also you have included measures of electric vehicles, the number that are anticipated, and you include all the different values and projections accordingly. And this is also a very important table where you are including your key underlying assumptions and parameters for your projections. And again, this is an example that shows how you can fill the table with the necessary information based on your assumptions and parameters. And this is table 12, where you are providing information on progress on response measures. So this is a very simple table. So you include the sector and activity that is associated with the response measure, and correspondingly, what are the challenges in addressing the response measure, what actions have you done or undertaken based on the guidance in the MPGs in paragraph 78. So this is really a summary of the tables and a kind of a mind map that really gives you a clear understanding of how the tables are related to each other, and also how these tables are related to your NDC. If you look to the first column in terms of progress of what, so what we understand and what is the target. So this correspond to the description of your NDC and the appendix. And if you ask yourself, how will I track progress? So before you track progress, you need to define your indicators, understand your methodologies. So this is a link to your table 1, table 2, table 3. And then how will I achieve the target? So how do you know that you are achieving your target, or you are making progress in achieving your target? This will be actually clearly shown in your table 4, and also table 5 on policies, measures, and actions, and also your projections give you that picture in terms of understanding how far you are in achieving progress. And when you ask, am I on track or did I achieve the target? So your GHG emission and removal, which is table 6, will actually show this information, and also the structured summary, table 4, where you are actually making an assessment in terms of progress made, will show you this information. So just use it with caution because this is just us trying to understand the table and helping people to understand how you can make sense of the tables in terms of linking the necessary information from your NDC and also understanding what information is provided in what table. So with that, thank you very much, Brittany. Over.
Thank you so much, Katsiwe, for very comprehensive overview of the tables. I know that it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information that is required, but I do find the mind map that you presented at the end to be very helpful to get a clear understanding of understanding what are you tracking in your NDCs to how you will do so and to whether you meet the targets. So I think this is an opportune time to open the floor, open the chat to participants that may have questions, perhaps on the tables or flexibility provisions, any doubts that you may have during this process. Okay, I see a hand up from Chanel. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I have a question with regards to table 3 in the presentation, because table 3 is associated with any cooperative approaches that involve the use of ITMOs. And I'm wondering how that should be reported. Is it in tons of CO2? Is it specifically another metric? Just seeking clarity on how table 3 of the reporting should be reported.
Thanks for that question, Chanel. Chanel from the Bahamas. Would, would I like to perhaps invite Ketsiwe to respond to that one?
Yes, thank you, Chanel, for the question. Just to clarify, once again, that table 3, this is the table where you include the methodologies and the accounting approaches that you will have used. And of course, you have to also reflect in terms of what accounting or methodologies you have used when you are doing your corresponding adjustment, your ITMOs. So this information is also provided in terms of the methodologies and the assumptions that you would have used. But in terms of the ton CO2 that you're asking about, this is, you have to reflect in terms of progress in table 4, which is where you have to outline in terms of how much ton CO2 you have bought to use to your NDC, or you have sent out somewhere where you are balancing your books in terms of the corresponding adjustment. So it's very important so that it is clear that the emission reductions that you have achieved are actually true emission reductions. You are not double counting emissions that we have already sold out to other parties. So it is very important that the information on corresponding adjustment is included in that table. So when we look at your progress, we see the holistical picture in terms of what you have sold or what you have bought to account for your NDC, because we know that this now is the playing field is different. We also have commitments under your NDC. So that is why it's very important that you do the corresponding adjustment. Thank you.
Thank you, Katsiwe. Chanel, I hope that responded to your question. Okay, she says thank you in the chat. Okay, excellent. That's an excellent specific question on table 3 on ITMOs. Do you have any other comments, questions, doubts, perhaps on use of the tables or on the process? Okay, we have a question from Bernice Joseph in the chat. Are all the tables readily available now from the UNFCCC? I think I can take that one. The tables are available. The tables are available as they are in the NPGs, but I think if maybe your question is on the reporting tool. The reporting tool that that the Secretariat is preparing. Is that the question you have, Benice, or is it just on the availability of tables? Okay, on the reporting tool. I from the SBs and bond, I think the Secretariat still needs a little bit more time to share the latest version of the CRT reporter. That's the last information I have, unless others have additional information on that. Initially, it was supposed to be available in June. It's still June. I don't have further information on what date, but if anyone does know, please feel free to chime in.
Yes, I understand, Brittany, that the target is to actually establish the final tables by 30 June. So the Secretariat, I think during the SPs, assured parties that this will still happen, and if at all there will be some elements that they have to work it on improving, they will continue to do that, but the tool will be available for parties to use, I think, end of June, which is 30 June. They should publish the final versions of the tool.
Okay, thanks, Katsiva, for that clarification. And I think it's also important to note that the tool, the common the reporter tool, is aimed to support countries to generate the tables, but essentially the information that countries need to fill out the tables on indicators, on the methodologies that they use for their NDC targets would still have to be entered by the country. So there is still some effort on the manual end, on the parties end to enter that information. But yes, the tool should help support to help prevent some mistakes by having some automation included. Okay, thanks for the question. Any other questions on this topic, on CRTs, on the MPGs, on flexibilities? I had also put a question into the chat prompting seeking from countries whether they have started the process for tracking progress on their NDCs, whether countries have started to look at their NDCs, develop indicators, or any work from that end to start tracking the progress and implementation of their NDCs. Any countries have feedback on that? Or not quite as yet? I see Chanel's hand is still up. I don't know if that's a response, Chanel, or if that is.
Sorry, that's an old
the-
hand.
Okay, no problem. But okay, good to know. I see from St. Lucia, not as yet. I know that some countries through discussion are thinking or are starting the process. Okay. Denise from the MRV Hub is currently working with the Bahamas and St. Kitts on developing indicators and tracking NDC. So that's excellent. So there's some more country experiences to be shared soon. I think it's in the list. Okay. Fantastic. So I think this is a good time to move to our next presentation. Our next speaker, Mr. Fernando Farias from the UNEP Climate Copenhagen Center, will be taking us through some of the more practical exercises on how to develop appropriate indicators for NDC. So I'll hand it to you, Fernando. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, and hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes, very well.
After listening the presentation of my colleague Ketsiwe, presenting this whole range of tables for conducting the NDC tracking, well, I will try to cover the question of how can you fill all the tables presented by Ketsiwe if you don't have good indicators, and why everybody is talking on indicators is, well, indicators became very popular in terms of NDC tracking because the MPGs includes in the paragraph 65 that each party shall identify indicators to track progress of the NDC. No, so it becomes very clear that we need this tool of indicators, but once we have the mandate to use indicators to check the progress of our mitigation commitments, that can be different types of mitigation commitments, we may think that we need what type of indicators we need. Usually, we can think on quantitative indicators. We want to think in a number, we want to think in a percentage, or some goal that has been reached. But actually, the MPGs make it clear that qualitative indicators are also valid if we don't have the numbers, or very importantly, if we don't define an indicator in numerical terms. No. Anyway, if you are looking for a good summary of climate indicators, I will recommend you this publication from the Economic and Social Council that reported more than 150 indicators for climate change, not only for emissions, that is mostly what I'm covering now in terms of NDC tracking, but also for vulnerability adaptation, to take into account how the meteorological variables are evolving in time. So I recommend you, if you are looking for indicators, that you can have a look at this publication. As such, in this publication appears for GHG emissions a total of 8 types of indicators that can serve to use especially if you are thinking in the NDC in the new round of NDC that was presented by Jason at the beginning of the presentation. Anyway, coming back to indicators. What I want to do in this presentation is to show you a systematic approach for having good indicators, and good indicators in terms that can be useful for what they are needed. This is for doing a proper tracking of GHG emissions. The approach that I'm proposing has 5 steps. One is the the step number 1 and the step number 2 is more associated with targets, because before having a good indicator, we need to have a good target that can be used to be followed by the or tracked by the indicator. No? So in this approach that I'm presenting today, step 1 and step 2 are related with targets. Step 3 and step 4 are related with better indicators, and step 5 closes everything in terms of how to report this information of indicators and how to keep in a good way all the information that has been generated in the process. Okay, so my idea in this presentation is go through these 5 steps. We can go one by one, and we can see that this is what you are looking for when you are trying to have a better indicators. But as I mentioned before, the first 2 steps, step 1 and step 2, are aimed at having better NDC targets. Because, I mean, if we don't have a clear idea of what is our target, it's difficult to have a very clear idea of how we will do a proper tracking of this target. Okay, so I will show you a number of practical or real examples of targets that show the variety of options that countries have selected in terms of presenting mitigation targets. First, in this slide, I'm presenting GHG emissions-related targets, like, for instance, Brazil, that says that they will reduce the emissions by 37% compared with a previous year, or the example of Morocco that also includes a percentage of reduction, but in this case below a business as usual scenario. A third type of target is, for instance, Argentina. That Argentina states not a percentage, but an absolute value of a number of tons of megatons that will be reduced by 2030. I'm just in this case showing you some examples of targets. This is other group of targets that are not GHG emissions, but are related to emissions. They are, we can say that they are indirectly linked to the GHG emissions. For instance, increasing the number of energy projects, or installing more renewables. All these are also valid NDC targets, but we know that since they are not GHG emissions related directly, we will need to use different targets. And the point I want to make now is that these targets should be what they are called as smart targets. Smart means that they should be specific, so clearly defined. They should be measurable, so they can be measured either quantitatively or qualitative. They should be ambitious, they should be relevant, and then should be time bound. And this is important because in terms of the targets and the indicators we need to use to do a proper tracking, as I indicated before, we need to have targets and indicators that complies with these requirements. No. For instance, And this is a little exercise that we can do ourselves. For instance, the following target, achieving a share of 28% of renewable power by 2030, can be considered as smart. Well, we can say that although it appears a number, but this number is not clear how it's measured. No, this is one example. No, it doesn't say if we are considering imports of exports of renewables. Is if the case is our system is interconnected with the electric system of other countries. No, the point I want to make here, and here are the comments I'm considering, is that the more information we present for the targets, the easier will be to identify a proper indicator and also to make a good tracking. No, if our NDC target is very simplified, probably we will have problems when we need, in terms of preparation of our BTRs, to account if we are on track to comply with a target. So my main recommendation here is try to have targets that can be very clear in terms of how they can be measured, and in this case they will be much easier to track using the appropriate indicator. A second example will be more like a qualitative target, no, qualitative example, because as probably you have seen in some of the NDCs, there are some willingness to, for instance, to increase public awareness of the effects of climate change and impacts on general health. And of course, this is something that is needed and is a target that is very valuable in terms of complying with this. The point is how we can make it in a better way, that the process of tracking this target can be reached. No, and here I can show you some questions that we can make in order to measure if we are getting an increase in the public awareness related of the society in terms of the effects of climate change. No, and if we are able to answer all these questions that are presented on the right-hand side, then we can say that we will be able to have a target and an indicator that can be worked together in terms of being useful for following the target. The step 2 then is, as I mentioned, no, first we have to see if our target is smart. If it's not, then we can make it smart, and then we can make it more clear in order to have an indicator. Remember that the whole issue here is not to have an indicator, just to have an indicator if we don't have a good target. Or we can think that if we don't have the best target, we can use the indicator to clarify what the target was intended to say. And this is the how we are moving from the target side to the indicator side. Because if once we have the target, we can move to identify the indicator. As I mentioned, indicators are closely related to the targets. For instance, if we are talking of a target of GHG emissions, we should think in an indicator that one is quantitative, two is related to GHG emissions, and three, we can see that is evolving in time. Okay, we need an indicator that can show that there is something happening. No, an indicator that doesn't move is not very useful to verify what we are looking for. The targets usually have an objective in time, so in the future. So if we want to check what is happening in the future, then we need an indicator that is progressing in time, or that is telling us something in time, that we are closer to the target, or we are moving away from the target, or that is not enough what we are doing to comply with the target. Okay, so there is a number of indicators that we can use. There is not a single indicator that we can use. Probably we will choose one indicator to make the to use it as the NDC tracking for each of the targets that we will use. But my message is that it's not obvious to always, sometimes it's obvious, but not always it's obvious which is the best indicator that we can use to do the NDC tracking. So keep your mind open to check different types of indicators if the target, particularly the target, is not completely or well defined. And here I'm presenting you a number of possibilities of indicators that can be like absolute emissions or a percentage, or as I show you in the example of Argentina, a peaking target, which is again presented in terms of emissions of CO2. Then we can, if we can identify the target, and here are some examples of GHG related targets, then we are in a situation of identify data. No, we can have a very good indicator. We can have a very good target, but if we don't have data to assess the indicator, then we are in problems. The second element that is important is to identify a methodology to compile the data. Eventually, we will need to make some calculations. Eventually, we'll need to make some estimations on how confident we are with data. And we will need, therefore, a methodology that is appropriate to assess the indicator on time. I'm mentioning this because sometimes it appears that the work finishes when we identify the indicators, but actually I think that in practical terms it's more important to identify the source of data, and if we have the data, that will allow us to make the assessment or the evaluation of the indicators. And conversely, if we don't have a good methodology, then again, it won't be enough to have a good indicator and to have a good data if we don't have the methodology that we need. Always is a question as Ketsiwe presented, no? From where we can get good data. And I will say that in general, if we rely on a solid national GHG inventory, then we will have a good basis, a good foundation for assessing GHG indicators. Of course, it's not enough, no, because what an inventory tells us is what happened in the past, and many times we are looking for what will happen in the future. How far or how close are we from our target by 2030? No, but I would say that in general, counting on a good national GHG inventory will solve many problems in terms of assessing indicators. And also because we can use sometimes the IPCC methodologies, the same methodologies or similar methodologies used for the IPCC inventory in order to assess a future emission of the same subsector or the same subsector of the IPCC inventory. No? The final step, the step number 5 that I want to share with you is compiling, reporting, documenting, and archiving. And always I try to mention how important is not only making a calculation or an estimation associated with an indicator, but to have the information that allows the same estimation or calculation to be repeated by an independent team or by, in this case, when there is a process of review of the BTR or the chapter of NDC tracking. If a country is not able to reproduce the value of the indicator, then it comes under I mean, it gets complicated, no? Because we know that this is a process that evolves in time. So every 2 years, countries need to produce a new BTR. And if they are not consistent in using the same information or the same methodology for doing the estimation of the indicators, then it's a problem of lack of consistency. And for this is needed to have a good process for compiling the information, reporting, documenting, and archiving, thinking that this process will be a process that will not stop. It's a process that reporting, in this case in BTR1, will be like the first chapter of a book of many chapters. And all these chapters need to be consistent each other, no? And I think that in this case, this is the important message that this 5 steps process for indicators need to be presented. There is a number of information that must be or can be reported in the BTR. It is not only a matter of filling tables. I will say that the indicators are much more than numbers that will cover the tables presented previously. But as important as the numbers are how the numbers were calculated, what was possible to do with the data, and what was possible not to do if data was missing. All this information should be reported in the BTR, with the aim of improving. No, the idea is not only to show what are the weaknesses, the current weaknesses, but also try to find in the future a way to improve how the indicators are estimated. And this is my last slide. Is just to show you that this is a process. No, the process is that the indicators will be useful if we have them in the step 1 to be associated with a number of elements that will allow us to check how the indicator is moving in the time. In BTR1, the information will cover up to the inventory 2022. No? But in BTR 2, 3, and 4, we will move closer to the 2030 time year that most of countries have included into their NDC as the year when they will show how they comply or not with the commitments they made under the Paris Agreement. This is what I wanted to present today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Fernando, for that presentation and taking us through the steps of the smart indicators, the different steps. Definitely, this will be the next steps for lots of the countries in this network. Would the floor is open again for any questions for Fernando on the smart indicators, on the process, on what it would take, or any specific question on process that anyone might have on the development of indicators and putting it into practice. I see none yet, but please feel free to also put your questions in the chat. We can take some time at the end of the last session to address any final questions. But please do put your questions in the chat even while presenters are speaking, so that you don't forget them.
I just want to comment, Brittany, that I'm looking at the question and comments in the chat, and I completely agree that the NDC tracking process and the definition of the NDC and the NDC targets are very closely related. We cannot expect to have good indicators if we don't have good NDC targets. So I'm happy that several countries are working with this approach of not only looking at indicators, but also looking at how to improve the NDC targets. And I think that the next year, when we will have new NDCs commitments, all the process of preparing the NDC will be much more related to the future indicators that will be used.
Absolutely, I do agree. Yeah, and it's very positive to see that countries are doing these two exercises or attempting to do both of them at a similar time. Yeah, but we'll see what this BTR looks like, and the subsequent BTR2s will also look different with updated NDC targets in the third NDC cycle next year. Thanks so much, Fernando, for your session. very technical, very practical, and putting it to use. Before we move on to our next speaker, I see a hand raised from St. Lucia. Anika, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick question. This is my first time actually working in country whilst they're preparing their NDC. So I just wanted to get your, your feedback on how easy it is or what it's been like for countries that are revising their NDCs or developing their NDCs. Have you seen countries that have simultaneously developed their targets whilst they're revising their NDC? And would you recommend we do it along the same time, or is this something that we can potentially do right after we submit the revised NDC? Just based on your experience and what we can do moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Nika. I think that it's a challenge. Definitely, it's a challenge to prepare the NDC to have good targets, who have good indicators. But my general recommendation will be try to use what is available for you, the help that different organizations and projects can provide to countries. I think that CBGSP is a very good opportunity for countries to exchange what other countries are doing. And I think this is important because probably this concept of having regional networks will make much more sense that for countries in similar national circumstances compared, for instance, a country very apart geographically and with a different data or different climate policy. No, so my recommendation will be make good use of these projects. They are built to help countries in preparing better NDC. So I think that maybe Brittany can at the end make some comments on how can the project can help countries to make better NDCs and better BTRs in the next months.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Anika, for raising the question. I can address that right now and not wait for the end since we have the floor open now. But as Fernando rightly mentioned, yes, countries in this Transparency Network and the Anglophone Caribbean Network can definitely take the opportunity to use both the regional trainings, webinars such as this, as well as country-specific in-country activities that countries may opt to seek direct country support in building capacity, taking a look at their current NDCs, and starting that process and taking a look at and thinking about what would be the most relevant indicators, or at whatever stage countries are at. So that's definitely one type of exercise, and as further information comes out on the use of the CRT reporter tool, that's also support that could be provided from the CIBIT GSB project, as well as support in filling out CTF tables or understanding them. So we know that this is a crucial time for countries as they're preparing their BTRs, or for some like St. Lucia who have started the process of updating their NDC targets for the next submission. Yes, please reach out. Please reach out and make use of the support available. Thank you, Anika, for bringing that up, and for Fernando for tying us very nicely into our next speaker, our next and final speaker, which is really, in these sessions, we're all often trying to get as much as possible national experience, country experience from the region and other countries in similar situations. So I'm happy to introduce our final speaker, Ms. Pradeepa Bolana, Senior Director of Climate and RED Plus from the Ministry of National Resources in the Government of Guyana, who will take us through the experience from Guyana in preparing their BTR and also taking a look at the work that was done in their NDC and mitigation chapter. Very timely. Thank you and welcome, Pradeepa.
Thanks a lot, Brittany, and thanks to the team for extending an invitation to Guyana to share our experience in compiling the BTR, specifically with a focus on the NDC reporting and looking at how that is integrated within our national system of continuous reporting, but also for NDC tracking in Guyana. Just wanted to confirm that you're seeing the slides in presentation mode.
It's not in presentation mode as yet. But we can see your screen.
Okay, so I'll continue on because I'm seeing it in presentation mode. Perhaps there is a slight delay time. Unless, Brittany, you would like to share it?
I can share. That's no problem.
Okay, I'll take it down.
One moment here. I have it on the screen.
Sure. Maybe I can start to talk to the first few slides as we bring them on.
Sure.
Okay, so our process of commencing reporting on the BTR started several years ago when Guyana's greenhouse gas inventory, our NDC reporting, our work then on submitting what was the plan to be our biennial update report came into being. So that really was a process that started close to 5 years ago. Next slide, please. And hadn't at that time planned to submit our BTR in this year. But what was clear coming out of the guidance from the UNFCCC is that if countries are at a stage where the biennial update report, the greenhouse gas inventory, perhaps even work on national communication, if those are at the stage where all of the elements or most of the elements are present for a biennial transparency report, that those measures should be aligned to, and those areas of progress should be aligned to a BTR submission. So in a way, we switched gears from what was going to be our BER submission to our BTR submission. And in many ways, a lot of what we would have been putting together for the run-up to our BER submission had to do with our NDC tracking and had to do with our greenhouse gas inventory. So there was some alignment which we had to do in the later part of last year, the earlier part of this year, and that came together to form what was the basis of our BTR, which is the greenhouse gas inventory and the reporting on NDC tracking. Next slide, please. So I make this point to say that even though there might be, plans that lead to another destination, that really it is advisable for countries to take a step back and to look to see what really is the next best step forward, not just what was in train all along, but what could be that next step that would serve the best interest of the country. So for example, in the case of Guyana, we realigned efforts that were geared at a BER submission to a BTR submission. And in this process, as we took the step back to see what really was necessary. So we had our NDC reporting, our NDC programmatic tracking at national and regional levels. And we also had our greenhouse gas inventory, which was just newly updated as we were making our way to these UNFCCC submissions. So we became aware, and it was a key part of our decision-making process, that two of the crucial elements that we were working on for our national communication and for our BOR, which are the GHG inventory and tracking on NDC progress, that those were already in place. So aligning the BOR to the BTR became easier and in a way the next best step for Guyana to take rather than to only submit a BOR. So in essence, we looked at, and this is reflected in the first presentation in today's webinar as well. So Guyana took a look at what was absolutely necessary to be submitted, and these are the areas in bright orange, the greenhouse gas inventory, and reporting on NDC tracking. And we saw a lot in today's webinar about the tabular formats and the information that is necessary to facilitate efficient and effective NDC tracking. And those are two of the elements that are central and that anchor the BTR. And these are the areas that we paid perhaps over 80% of our time and attention to get these together. We also looked at what areas are specific to Guyana, certainly because we are a heavily forested country. The Red Technical Annex was an important part of our submission, and this is also a key part of our NDC reporting. So even though this is a recommended area, not a compulsory area, it was one of the areas that we shifted over to the mandatory section. So the Red Technical Annex with its accompanying NDC tracking indicators, that was also to our minds and what formed part of our submission. You can think of that also being in bright orange. In terms of mitigation actions and progress, tracking on the progress on each indicator, we also included this in the BTR, though they were not mandatory. The area that we did not include in the BTR submission back in April is that area on projections. Next slide, please. And the reason for that is a part of what was planned for our submissions to the UNFCCC, specifically Guyana's third national communication. So one of the messages I wanted to share today as well is that whilst we were all set to work on our BOR and we shifted gears to our BTR, which is our biennial transparency reporting aspects, we were also making plans to have all of these fit together for Guyana's third national communication. And connected to the point which I started making in the previous slide, the reason why we exercise and stated flexibility in that chapter in our BTR, where the country is able to outline the flexibility areas that it is calling on for its first BTR submission, we outlined that the chapter on projections is going to be submitted as part of our process of the national communication. And our timeline for the national communication is at the end of July, which is next month. So back in April, we had a plan to submit our national communication at the end of July, perhaps at latest mid of August. So we outlined in that flexibility chapter, not only the point that we have not included, but we've accompanied that with indication of when that will be submitted. So we shared within the flexibility chapter that we will be submitting the projections and that will come, and we gave an estimation on the timeline when that will be submitted, and that is the end of July. We also indicated for more medium-term submissions in the flexibility chapter, and these also have to do with the NDC tracking areas of adaptation, as well as some aspects in relation to technology needs assessment, that these submissions would come later. The adaptation chapter we outlined for that to come later this year, and then a national adaptation plan in the first quarter of next year. So it's important to note, at least from our experience, that all the sections that you would need to have in a perfect BTR would not all need to be in place. One, not right away, and two, maybe not in the first BTR. But what is an underlying element is that reporting on the NDC aspects, on the NDC programs, both the conditional and the unconditional elements, that and the greenhouse gas inventory chapters, those are central to what would need to be reported. and any additional aspects that flexibility allowances would cater to, those could be identified and a timeline given when they would be submitted. Next slide, please. So I'll mention this here because it is connected to timelines and when additional information could be submitted. So after we have submitted the Guyana BTR submission in April, we commenced the process for conducting of the review of the BTR. So the ETF, the Enhanced Transparency Framework, also speaks to how the review is to be conducted. And I make this point here because it has to do, as I mentioned, with timelines. So as long as additional information is submitted within 8 weeks of the commencement of the review, whether the country chooses to take the option of the in-country review or the centralized review, whichever option is identified and selected by the country, information could be taken on board and deemed as part of that submission once it is 8 weeks before the in-country review, if that were the selected option, um, when that is conducted. So, for example, Diana has requested for the review to be done in over the period 30th of September to the end of the first week of October. So all additional information that we would like to submit to be considered as part of that review would need to be submitted 8 weeks before the 30th of September. So I make that point to share that even if all of the information is not readily available and countries, parties wish for those bits of information to be considered, or some of that information to be considered within that BTR, then there is still time for that to be submitted before the review is conducted. Next slide, please. And this connects to what I think would be the scenario for many parties, for many countries, that they probably have been working on their next BUR, which was our experience, and then the BTR became a higher priority, and then national communications too were being updated, as in Guyana's experience, Guyana's case, and then NDC targets are being updated in terms of progress and in terms of coming up with more quantitative indicators, which is also something we are working on in Guyana. So, it is not, ideally, the process should be a clear stop and start for every one of the UNFCCC reporting. But the reality is that it's not like that. So, countries are at any one point in time straddling various tracks of UNFCCC reporting, whether it's a forest reference emissions level, whether it's national communication, whether it's updating NDCs, whether it's submitting BTRs, whether it's working on new information, additional information to complement BTR's compulsory submission. It could be a variety of areas that might be in play at any particular point in time. So the point here is that whilst there is no specific template, there is enough information to guide what needs to be submitted right away and those areas of flexibility. And what we've tried to do in Guyana is to strike the right balance between those two things. So the common tabular formats are available, have been available, and within Guyana's BTR submission, we submitted details on every one of the NDC indicators, the areas with regards to progress, aspects with regards to greenhouse gas reductions where that is applicable, and using the templates which has been shared in an earlier presentation relating to specifically Table 5. So a point of note here is that the common tabular format is available, and that has been available for some time and ready for parties to use. But the common reporting templates, the UNFCCC is still working on that for that to be available to countries by end of this month. So actually, just last Thursday, we were written to by the UNFCCC, an official email from the UNFCCC to the national focal points, in the case of Guyana, to the national focal point for the UNFCCC, asking for an ETF focal point to be identified, specifically who would be engaged with the UNFCCC team to receive those CRTs, the common reporting templates, and for a secondary a supporting person to also be identified. So those persons would be directly engaged with the UNFCCC ETF to receive information on the templates and also to operationalize those templates. So in the case of Guyana, we would convey that by the timeline. I think the deadline is on the 20th of this month. So in another 2 days' time, we will convey that officially, and the indication from the UNFCCC is that by end of June, by end of this month, those CRTs would be available. So the common tabular formats that we have used, we are going to look at best ways to have that be part of this review, and to the extent possible to use that information as time would permit to retrofit that within the CRTs. Or if that can be done in this review, for this submission, then we would certainly align for plans to have that be a main area of focus for our next BTR submission. Next slide, please. So it's important that, a lot of the work that is done on the projections and the emissions reporting, you can click it one more time, please, that this is grounded in the IPCC most recent guidelines. And because the CRTs weren't available right away, the common tabular formats were available. What we grounded our analysis and our methodological assessments and analyses on were on the IPCC guidance, so that whatever comes of the tabular formats or the CRTs or the guidelines on projections were that to be, further developed, revised, expanded, that what anchors the reporting for Guyana is indeed, set against the IPCC most recent guidelines. So that is one of the recommendations and one of the lessons we've learned as well, that not everything in terms of guidelines even would be available immediately for countries to use. So for example, in Guyana, because we submitted our BTR in April, we didn't have the value of the CRTs, the final CRTs, which would come in a few weeks' time. But we still went ahead to use the best available guidance and the common tabular formats for our submission. Next slide, please. So a lot of what we have done for the NDC reporting is coordinated in terms of its central organizing at the level of the Office of the President, Guyana's Office of the President, where the Department of Environment and Climate Change sits. And within that coordination mechanism, we have strong teams at the sector level, the main sector level. So agriculture, forestry, energy, and we saw some of these listed in one of the earlier presentations. So what we found worked well for us is a centralized coordinating mechanism and technical coordinating teams at each of the main sector levels. Now, there are challenges here sometimes because some of the sectors are stronger in terms of capacity than other sectors. So, for example, in Guyana's case, the forestry and energy sectors have a higher level of capacity than the other sectors. So, what we've been trying to do is to have sharing of experiences in terms of how do we report an NDC progress and tracking for those sectors that are stronger to help those sectors that need more capacity building. And we've also focused on linking the work for each of the NDC areas in agriculture, forestry, energy, and the aspects with regards to our NDC commitments within national and international reporting. So whether it is for reporting under the CBD or it's reporting for national communication, that these are mainstream within the broader global and multilateral reporting that Guyana conducts. Next slide, please. And this means that for each of the areas that we work on, we establish the procedures and the framework for institutionalizing what we're doing for NDC tracking. So for example, in the energy sector, the work that we are doing in Guyana, including data collection, ensuring that quality assurance and quality control is maintained, because what is important, what we found to be important is that the analysis that will come out of any kind of model or technologically advanced compilation and analysis is only going to be as good as the data that is used. So, getting high quality, accurate, precise data to the extent possible and reflective of best efforts are really central to ensuring that what comes out of the analysis is the best that the country can put out. So, getting strong input data, data on projects, data on progress, data on impacts that we found that to be quite important. Next slide, please. What we've also worked on in Guyana is the development of a database on projects. And that has helped us to consolidate all of the areas that we have been working on in terms of the NDCs that we are reflecting in our national strategy and that we're reflecting also in our other UNFCCC reporting, that there is that archive of all projects that are being implemented on adaptation, on mitigation, on energy, and on cross-cutting areas. Because that we found to be a very useful input tool to the common reporting to the common tabular formats, as well as what will come for the CRTs. Next slide, please. So NDC tracking, as I mentioned, we've undertaken a centralized as well as technical leads at the ministry and agency level. We've worked on building a database on projects, and that has been really helpful to tie implementation to NDC commitments so that every NDC commitment has a home and there is a team working to advance that NDC commitment. And not only that one-way track of having implementation, but a two-way track where progress on that implementation comes back to the central coordinating mechanism through the ministries so that there is clear direction in terms of what needs to be done, those aspects being implemented, and then performance and progress on those actions coming back into the central reporting frame for BTRs and for everything else that will be necessary to feed from this information. Next slide, please. And as I close my presentation, I'd like to share with you just a little bit in terms of the lessons we've learned. And I'll focus on the middle box, conscious that I'm running out of time, that there is a lot of flexibility in terms of the BTR structure. I mean, recognizing the very fact that the CRTs will come out at the end of this month, we, in terms of our Guyana experience, we had to use what was available. But our take home message is that no matter which point in time a party is starting to work on the BTR, there is always a solution available at that point in time. So whether the tables are ready, whether all of the sectors have the information to the accuracy that the country requires, there is a pathway to the finish line, no matter which stage you're at or no matter which point in time that work is being done. And on that point, I would have liked to discuss a bit more from the question that was raised earlier in terms of how we link Article 6 reporting to the NDC tracking and the BTR. But perhaps on another occasion or through questions, I can share our experience with that in terms of how we have connected our cooperative approach within our reporting for Article 6 to the work on the BTR. But I thank you very much and sort of gone over my time.
Thank you so much, Pradeepa, for that excellent presentation. Okay, you can see me again. Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation on Guyana's experience. I think this is really the richest part of these types of exchanges. I know that we're right on top of the closing time of the webinar, but I do would like to ask your indulgence for 5 more minutes, especially if you have questions for Pradeepa from Guyana's experience. And also, I think it's very relevant, Pradeepa, if you would like to share the experience of reporting on ITMOs and how that was done, for Guyana. I think that'd be very relevant, and it fits one of the questions. from our participants earlier.
Sure. So maybe if I can just briefly touch on that. So when we were drafting our initial report and our annual report for submission to the centralized accounting and reporting platform, the CARP, we took a look at what are the options for cooperative approaches that are available as defined by the Paris Agreement, specifically under Article 6.2. And what we had to do at that time was to match the options of cooperative approaches as defined by 6.2, and then to see how that connects to our NDC tracking. So sustainable management of forests and emissions reductions under a RED Plus framework for sustainable forest management, SFM, that was identified by Guyana as our CA. So that is listed within our initial report. And that also matched to a central tenet within Guyana's NDC, which is on protecting forests, keeping deforestation rates low, expanding protected areas, and also strengthening capacities for forest governance and implementation of codes of practice. All of that embodied within sustainable forest management. So our approach was to look at the guidelines for the CAs, the cooperative approaches, as defined by 6.2 and 6.4, 6.2 specifically in this case for us, and then look to see where that connects with our NDC, and then connect that to our greenhouse gas inventory reporting. So in a way, it was like three pieces of a puzzle to identify where the guidance is telling us the decision could be made, connecting that with where we've positioned our NDC commitments, whether conditional or unconditional, and then connecting that to our greenhouse gas inventory and projections so that we have the international guidance, we have the national strategy, and we have the quantitative assessments now lining up. So that those three bits needed to come together for us now to say our CA, our cooperative approach, which is where our ITMOs would be based, is connected to this item 1.1, commitment 1.1 of our NDC. And here is where we are tracking that in terms of our greenhouse gas inventory. So in summary, it starts with looking at the CA, the guidance within 6.2 and 6.4, and then connecting that dot to the NDC and then to the greenhouse gas inventory reporting.
Excellent, fantastic. I think that addresses the questions that our colleague from the Bahamas had, and I know that there are other countries in this region who will have interest in reporting on their Article 6 under their within the BTR and linked to their NDCs. Pradeepa, we have another question for you in the chat from Wendy. Is the database of projects online or publicly available? I'm interested in the structure. And also, Wendy, if you would like to elaborate further, please go ahead.
Thanks, Wendy, for that question. And so, when we started to look to compiling our reporting on NDCs, so the templates, the common tabular formats and what will come from the CRTs, it's very helpful, but it's also a lot. So like there are many sections and subsections. So we were trying to find a good takeoff point, a starting point where we can put together all of this information. So like in Guyana, we have over 100 projects that are from each of the sectors within our NDC. So we found, and within the ministerial level and the agency level in Guyana, not everyone understands CRTs and common tabular formats and, the whole ecosystem of the ETF. So what we found worked for us is to design a simple but comprehensive Excel table that aims to capture all of the information that would eventually be able to populate the common tabular formats and eventually the CRTs. So we designed a very simple Excel template that asks for agencies to identify what is the project, what is the time frame, what it's going to deliver, what is the main target it's seeking to accomplish. And we at the centralized level would input which NDC indicator, because not all of the agencies even are aware of all the NDC indicators. So we would tie that, we pin that to an NDC indicator. And then we further would pin that to the greenhouse gas inventory reporting and the CTFs and the CRTs. So we found that we needed a takeoff point that wasn't the common tabular formats or the CRTs. And that takeoff point is the place where we solicit information, we seek out information from each of the implementers for the sectors within the reporting in the BTR. So we designed a very simple Excel table that simple but comprehensive, because what we didn't want to end up being in a situation of having to every time go back and seek more and more and more information. So it's important that the first attempt, or at least the first two attempts, should solicit and put together almost all the information you need to populate the common tabular formats. So a simple Excel table was what worked best for us. And we'd be happy to share how this was shaped from the Guyana side. But I think parties and countries could come up with what works for them as well too. But we found that the best takeoff point wasn't the CTFs or the CRTs. That we had to do our own in-house table to first get the information in the system.
I think that's a very good example. Yeah, thank you. And thank you also for that response. And thank you in the chat from Wendy. Yeah, I think myself and others may agree that we'd definitely be interested in seeing what this process, what this table looks like for Guyana. I think it might be similar for other countries. Yeah, who may not all their stakeholders speak the same CRT, CTF language as we do. I see Ketsiwe, please go ahead for a question or comment.
Thank you very much, Brittany. I don't have a question per se, but I think just a comment. And thank you, Pradep, for sharing the experience of Guyana. I think it's quite encouraging from what you have achieved so far. And just want to also commend you for answering the question I think that was asked earlier on the corresponding adjustment. I think bringing that practical example in terms of how it works in practical sense, I think that is appreciated. And also what I liked about your experience is actually the message and the lessons that you have learned in terms of encouraging countries to start where they are. The information might not be available, you might not have all the data, you might not have all the capacities, but there's quite a lot of, I think, leverage that countries can use in terms of the flexibilities and also the other reporting processes that are actually ongoing in terms of how you have actually sat down and thought, okay, let's really submit a BTR here, and then the other necessary information, we can include it in the national communication. And I just want to encourage countries, because I know that a lot of countries have received support from Jeff to actually do a BTR and a national communication. And it's really important to strategize here to actually ensure that to submit, you look at what is mandatory under the BTR and also start where you are, what information is available for you now, because your BTR, your first BTR is really a baseline. It's not supposed to be perfect. And as the principles of the Paris Agreement in terms of continuous improvement, you will improve on your subsequent BTR and your next BTR and your next BTR. So it is very important and encouraging to hear from Guyana, and it's really commendable that you actually, even though it is not mandatory for seeds to submit the BTR, but the leadership that you have shown and also the encouragement from other countries to actually follow the steps is actually really commendable. And thank you for that.
Yeah, I think Ketsiwe, you've closed us off quite well, and I think it goes without saying that the efforts and the strategizing that Guyana has done to get this tremendous effort from working at home on the ground through projects to submitted in April of this year is extremely commendable. And yes, there's lots of lessons to be learned from starting where with the information that you have, we're using the methods that work for our countries, whether it's through Excel tables or informal meetings. I think we have. I see some relating comments in the chat as well for similar things that have been done. I see. Okay, can't see your hand is still up, but I thought you had another comment, but yes, I
No,
think
sorry about that.
no problem, no problem. I thought you had some additional closing words for us. No, but I think with the comments that we've had and the questions that you responded to, really shows that the leadership of this region of SIDS and Caribbean SIDS, will continue to champion the efforts in transparency. Also noting that there's time for improvement over time, as Katsiwa said, with the principles of the Paris Agreement. But with this, with that said, I'd like to thank you very much, Pradeepa, for your excellent presentation, and also to all our other speakers on the webinar this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We have just one last final segment just to give short feedback on this webinar, and then we will be closing. So I have put in the chat a link to Mentimeter. To get your response, and you can also scan the screen that I have. You can also scan this QR code to access Mentimeter. Let me know once you are in. This will only take a couple minutes, I assure you. In. Okay, we have 3, just need a couple more in. Scan the screen. Or go to menti.com and put in the code that's on the screen, 51630417, or you can click the link that is in the chat. Okay, so just let us know from where you're joining in the countries, some in South America, some in Central, most in the Caribbean region. Excellent. And please let us know how satisfied you were with the webinar. And in the following slide, we will ask you what other areas, what is a key point that you learned from this session, and this will help us also to gauge the level of engagement and some simple capacity indicators, since we're talking about indicators. So flexibility is important for countries in preparing their BTRs. There's a simple way of making indicators for tracking progress, the SMART way. Some would like to see more sessions every other month. Okay, we can work on that. There's sufficient guidance to take reporting forward to the BTR, even in the absence of tools. Experience from countries like Guyana has been insightful. NDC reporting and tracking should be mainstreamed in national reporting. Excellent. reporting tips for first BTR submissions. It's helpful to see examples from countries who have done it so far. Excellent contributions. Thank you very much. And if you have any other comments that you would like to share, whether on this webinar or or other topics that you'd like to see, we have some scheduled based on the capacity assessment that was done in the first quarter of this year. But of course, we are always open to hearing additional ways and means to relay the information through this network. More webinars, presentations are concise and examples are helpful. Keep sharing country experiences and how they overcome challenges. Okay, so we'll definitely take this, especially the country experience portion is very valuable to learning and understanding. More webinars and collaborations with partners and partner organizations. Excellent. We can cover more ground when we are working together. Using the climate transparency platform to engage in discussions outside of webinars. So that's a good point. So following this session, I will also be following with an email to all those who attended this session and those who registered with a link to this training, to this event page on the climate transparency platform, where you will find the training recording as well as the materials from today. And we can also open up forums for discussion, which is another feature of the climate transparency platform, for discussions on how to overcome challenges or other related issues, especially as we move into BTR reporting this year. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time and your indulgence for a few more minutes. We really appreciate it. And we'd just like to tell you thank you from all of us at the CIVIT GSP program and in the region, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. And don't forget that you can reach out for country support requests if you have specific questions or capacity needs that you need to fill in your countries. We can support with either finding you a support provider or support through the CIVIT GSP project ourselves. And lastly, just to preview for the next event for the network, this is a regional training for the Latin American Caribbean on the preparation and submission of national inventory reports under the ETF. This will be in Bogota, Colombia at the end of July. So for some of you, I'll see you there, and others, we'll see you soon on our next virtual engagement or otherwise. Thank you very much and have a great day.